Alrighty, we will go ahead and get going here. So thanks everyone so much for joining. We're excited to kind of share some of this knowledge with you and just hope that it becomes a fruitful discussion and can kind of just be a great learning opportunity for everyone. So a few housekeeping things we'll start off with. We will be recording this webinar and we'll send out the recording to everyone who registered. And then the PGP certificate and professional standard certificates will email out to anyone that attended today's webinar. You'll all be muted throughout the presentation. However, please feel free to put questions in the chat. And then if you would like to ask a question out loud, we'd be more than happy to unmute you. So please just raise your hand and then we can unmute you and you can kind of explain your question from there. So a little background about kind of how this webinar came to be. We oftentimes get questions from schools around regulations and best safety practices for school gardens and hydroponic units. And I think because there are no statewide regulations on what a school would have to do, sometimes it can feel like schools and early care centers maybe can feel overwhelmed by the unknown because since there's no regulation, there's not, a set list of guidance that you have to follow. So really the purpose of today's webinar is to let you guys all know some of the practical risks that come with growing for consumption and also how you can mitigate those risks as best you can. So we also want to say we always remind people to check in with their local county health department as they should always stay informed when you're starting to incorporate any school or early care center produced products into your cafeteria. They might have certain record keeping or just different things that you would want to check in with them about. So we always encourage that as well. All right, so I will turn it over to Amanda Deering. We are so grateful to be joined by Amanda Deering today. Amanda is with Purdue Extension, and she earned her bachelor's degree in biology and master's degree in plant biology from Central Michigan University. She completed her PhD at Purdue University in food microbiology and food safety, specializing in fresh produce food safety. Her research focuses on examining the internalization of human pathogenic bacteria in plants, as well as routes of contamination that can contribute to plants harboring pathogenic bacteria. Amanda works closely with industry to develop and test novel sanitation treatments that can be used for fresh produce. She leads the Purdue Safe Produce Indiana team that works in Indiana to deliver good agriculture practices, or GAPs, and food and good manufacturing practices, GMPs, trainings for growers and producers, and develops resources that address the real-time needs of growers in Indiana. So that would be all of you guys if you're growing in the school setting. So Amanda will save some time at the end, but I just wanted to say, please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat throughout the presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda, and she can feel free to add anything else that I'm missing, Amanda, and then take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the invite. And I'm glad I can spend, I guess, the next hour and a half or so with everyone. As was mentioned, please go ahead and put questions in the chat. We'll try to answer them as we go along. So you don't need to save your questions to the end. And so Sylvia will just stop me and we'll get those questions answered. So please feel free to do that. So we're going to talk about some of the food safety basics for produce growers and really talk about why this is important. And so we work with farms of all sizes, from the very small to the very large, and everything in between. And we've pretty much seen it all. So all the concepts that we're talking about today, you have to think of how they apply to your operation. Okay, so I know a lot of you guys are doing hydroponics indoors. Maybe some are doing stuff outdoors. Maybe you have animals at your school. So everything is different. So as we go along today, just think of how this applies to your operation and what you're doing specifically. So the concepts are all the same. That's not going to change. So everything we're going to talk about, all the same, but how you implement practices and some of the risks will change depending on your operation. So just keep that in mind as we go along today. So why do we care about produce food safety? So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimate that each year, and these numbers are always right around in here, not obviously exactly that, but always pretty close. So 48 million people get sick from foodborne illness. And so I will say that in my opinion, we have one of the safest food supplies in the world, but we still have problems, right? So we have issues that we do need to address. And unfortunately, produce in the last 10 to 15 years is typically responsible for about half of all reported foodborne illnesses. So if you've read the news a few years ago, right, romaine lettuce, we had issues. We've had issues with cantaloupe. Sprouts kind of cleaned up their act, right? We had seems like sprout outbreaks all the time, and now we haven't seen many for quite a while. But you'll see here, let me get a pen. You'll see here that typically, so here's your produce, and so typically these outbreaks were associated with meat or meat byproducts, and that's because that's where these bacteria are typically found. But then we had this switch, like I said, about 15 years ago, to where it's actually the produce that is more of the problem. And so why? There's tons of reasons why. So A, we're listening to the government, right? USDA says half our plate should be fruits and vegetables, and we're listening, so we're buying more fresh produce. And because we're buying more, we're getting it from other places too. So we get a lot from Mexico, from Canada, even South America, Central America, right? So it's just a lot of produce moving around a lot. And so therefore it just increases the chances of something can happen. We're really good at detecting it now. And so we can detect a single cell. And so we are very good at reporting it now too. So we see these numbers, may not be that all that these problems weren't always there. They probably were, but we were just really good at detecting it and reporting it now. So we see it more often. So the microbial causes of illness are from either bacteria, parasites, and viruses. And most of what we're going to talk today are going to be about viruses. And so these are these single cell organisms that they live independently. They can grow on the surface of fruits and vegetables very well. They do that quite well. And they also make us sick. But we also have parasites and viruses. So those are common too. But for today, what we're mostly going to focus on are bacteria. And so the three that are the most common to cause foodborne illness is Salmonella, E. coli 157H7, and Listeria monocytogenes. So obviously there's others, but these are probably the most common ones that we have with fresh produce. It's going to be one of these three. And the reason they're problematic is they can go to very high levels in a pretty short amount of time. So you can start out with one cell, and within 24 hours, you can have millions of cells. And also, some of these have a very low infectious dose, meaning how many cells you have to consume to make you sick. So, for example, E. coli 157H7 has an infectious dose of approximately 10 cells. So that's pretty low. Whereas if you look at something like Listeria monocytogenes, that infectious dose is very high, where you need hundreds of thousands of cells to get you sick. So it just depends. But the main point here is we know bacteria can grow on the surface of produce and the plants very well. And where do we find these guys? Everywhere, right? So soil, people, water, manure, livestock, pets, wildlife, you name it. So if you have an indoor operation, right, you're going to be limiting some of these things. But guess what? You're never going to get rid of the people. The water's always could be a problem. So, and you'll say, well, I don't even have soil. I use a soilless soil, but usually there's some sort of substrate you're using to grow into, right? So like coconut, husk, things like that. So again, even if it's indoors, that doesn't mean zero risk. It means you've eliminated a lot of things, but there's still risks out there. And washing doesn't necessarily mean safe. So washing it is great. You should always do that, but we're not going to eliminate everything. And so this is actually a picture, a scanning electron micrograph of the surface of a cantaloupe. And all these like round or these oblong things here, those are all bacteria. And in fact, so you can see all those nooks and crannies that these bacteria can hide in, right? So on the surface of a cantaloupe, that makes sense because we know that's really rough, but you'd be surprised even on something that seems very smooth, like say a cucumber, you still see a lot of nooks and crannies if you look at the microscope level. So the washing, it eliminates some of it, but it's not gonna not gonna get rid of it, everything. The only sure way of killing everything is to cook it. And that's the one problem with produce is we often don't cook it. So therefore we have to be really careful as when we're growing it. And so here's just another micrograph. This is the surface of a lettuce leaf. And on the leaf, it has these natural openings that are called stomata, and they open and close to regulate gas exchange. And you can see when that stomata is open, the bacteria can get inside. And then if that stomata closes, well, then those bacteria are inside the leaf, and no amount of washing is going to get rid of that. So we already talked about it, cooked versus raw, right? So most produce items we don't cook. So therefore, we have to be careful on how we grow them to make sure that they're safe. And the produce can be contaminated at any point. So in the field or in the water from for hydroponic that you're growing it in, maybe during the washing or packing of it, maybe during cooling, during transport, maybe at the market, right? So it can be contaminated at any point. And I know a lot of growers that we work with, they get very frustrated because they do all this farm food safety stuff at their operation, and then they go into Walmart where they sell, say, their cantaloupe, and they'll see their cantaloupe with their sticker in a bin with 5 other farm stickers, right? So they're doing all this food safety, food traceability, and then like grocery store screws it up, right? So we're all in this together for sure, because at any of these points we can have problems. So what we're going to be talking about today are good agricultural practices or GAPs. And these are basically the growing conditions, practices, harvesting practices that minimize risk, right? We're never eliminating risk, and we can't ever even think that we could do that. The only way we minimize that risk is to cook it, and we can't do that. So everything we're talking about today is about managing that risk, and we're trying to reduce it as much as possible. And sometimes you can't do the best practice on your farm. It's just not possible, and that's okay, but we just understand that's a risk, right? And we manage that risk. That's all we can do. And so we do our due diligence managing those risks. So benefits to using gaps, obviously improving public health as we want. I have never met a grower that wants to make somebody sick, right? That's not our intent, but we just need to make sure that we think about these things as we're growing this produce for other people to consume. So steps for food safety on your produce farm, well, you're doing step one. So have some sort of training. And so we actually offer a whole day long training that growers can take. But this is a great training to just hit all the big things, right? And what are the riskiest things we can do and less risky and understand that. And then once, hopefully, after you take this training, you're going to go back and do a farm self-assessment. So you're going to look at your operation. And like I said, just think about how these things apply to what you're doing. Because all these things will apply. It's just going to look a little different how they do it. And then we can get into what these safety plans are, writing that. But I think the first step is doing that self-assessment and just seeing where you fall on all these concepts that we'll talk about today. And also, don't forget to inform your consumers of your on-farm food safety practice. That is very important. So all growers who introduce produce should be concerned about food safety. And I'm sure you've already all thought about it. I mean, it's just a liability issue. And like I said, I never have met a grower that wants to intentionally make somebody sick. But I've seen a lot of wrong practices done on farms, and once I explain why that is a risk, it's like, oh my gosh, didn't even cross my mind. So that's why we're talking about some of these things today, just to get put it in your mind that and that then you can go back to your operation and determine what it looks like. So what we're gonna split this into what we call the four W's. So we have water, waste, wildlife, and workers. And so workers can be anybody. So it's whoever is working on your farm. So it could be students, it could be volunteers, and so anybody that's involved with any of that operation. And I won't spend a ton of time talking about wildlife because I know a lot of you all are hydroponics and indoors, but we'll touch on it because it's not, I mean, it could happen that you do have a mouse or something or a bird or something gets in somewhere, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. And a lot of you probably won't be dealing with waste, so I won't spend a huge amount of time on that. But I wanted to just briefly go through some of this so you had it, like you said, as part of your GAPS training. All right, so water. So water is probably the biggest source of a contamination. And so the last big romaine lettuce outbreak we had, that was they determined it was the canal water that they were used for irrigation, and upstream from that was a huge dairy or cattle operation. And they were able to find that same strain of E. coli in from the cattle as what was making people sick. So water is definitely a source of contamination and it moves any of these pathogens around. So E. coli, Salmonella, Cryptosporidium. So usually during irrigation. So, and we know that. And we also use this water for so much stuff, right? We use it for irrigation, for pesticide application, if you're outdoor grower, frost protection, post-harvest washing, right? We just use it for a lot of stuff. And so we can have basically three different water sources that we have here. So municipal, groundwater, like a well, or surface water. So if you're on municipal water, that's the least likely to be contaminated because they are selling you potable water, right? They have to prove that it's potable. And you can then just request copies of your water. They are doing the water quality test for you because they're selling you potable water. So you can just pull those test results and you can have them as your records. If you're using a well, so I do recommend everybody test their well at least once a year, and we'll talk a little bit about more of that in a bit, but just test for generic E. coli. And you can do a presence absence test, and that's going to be cheaper than actually doing an enumeration. And if you get a positive, if it says present, well, then you need to do something. Right? We need to try to fix that. So here's just some you know, tips. Don't mix pesticides near the well. Basically, it's just protecting the well, right? We don't want anything coming back into the well that had come out. And we should inspect those wells at least annually. But like I said, it's a good practice just to do a test once a year. And surface water is the riskiest, right? Because we have zero control over it. We don't know what's swimming in it. We don't know what's flying over it. We don't know what's running through it, right? So, excuse me, this is the most dangerous. And it still can be used. We just have to make sure that we're using it correctly. And, but it can be used. I'm not saying you can't use surface water, but we have to know that I just say, think that it's probably contaminated. And so when you're using that water, how you apply it is important too. So if here, this is an example of this drip irrigation here. And so you can see here's those drip lines, and then they'll put typically mulch over top of that, or plastic mulch on the over top. So actually, this water never touches the above ground portion of the plant. So it was directed right to its roots, right? So if you have to use surface water for irrigation, this is the way to do it. So use drip, it's not touching, it usually doesn't touch any part of the plant except the roots. So that will be lowering your risk. If you're doing overhead irrigation, doing this with surface water is risky, right? Because this water is going to touch everything. And especially what we what we focus on the most is the harvestable portion of the crop. So this, if you have to use surface water, I wouldn't recommend using overhead irrigation. So water testing, like I said, once a year for generic E. coli if you have a well, and if you have city water, you just can get that. But I do think it's important to test that water at least once a year. And if you're doing surface water, we do recommend you test that. Really, you test it right before you're going to use it and knowing that it can change. But so say if you're using surface water and you test it, say once a month, you might be able to get some sort of trend, so maybe you test it once a month and you see in July and August your E. coli counts are super high. Well, then maybe that's when you tend not to use that water, right? So it it's a it's just one thing you can try to do to try to minimize your risk. And then we talked about well and municipal water. So when you're collecting these samples, take a representative one. The same if you're testing your well, you want to test it a representative sample. And so in the middle of your source, if you're doing groundwater, right, try not to kick up a lot of that sediment. And then you want to make sure that you contact that company before you're going to submit your water sample because that company will have probably a specific bottle they want you to use. They'll have specific instructions that they will have. So you want to make sure, especially if it's in a distribution system, allow the water to run before you collect that sample. Because again, we want a representative sample. We want to know what's in that well. We don't want to know what's in that faucet, right? So you can sanitize the spigot rim, you run your water, right? We're flushing out anything that could just be in the spigot. I usually say give it 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, fill your jar, close it, and then you get it cool as possible, as quickly as possible, and then get it to the lab. And so each lab will tell you exactly, how many hours you have to get it to the lab. It'll be very specific on all their directions. And if you don't follow those directions, guess what? They won't process it. So make sure you're very specific. You follow their specific tests. So when you ask for a test, you can use this method 1603, and that is one. But just ask them to do a generic E. coli test. Almost all of them, I would say, all of them can do that. This is pretty straightforward. And then again, make sure you follow all those instructions. That's very important. Yeah, and so how are they sampled? Basically, they filter that water sample through onto a petri dish, and then they're able to count how many, we call them colonies, but that all a colony is, because right, we can't see bacteria with our naked eye, but we grow it on a petri dish, and then where there was one bacteria, they keep growing and multiplying, they form a colony, and then we can count those colonies. And that represents where those bacteria were. And here's what we're testing for. So right in the world of bacteria, we have total coliforms, and then within that, we have what we call fecal coliforms. And so these are representatives from fecal matter. And then within that, we have generic E. coli. And then within that, we have the specific, like the E. coli 0157H7. So if we're testing for generic E. coli, this green bit, it doesn't mean that that water is going to make us sick, but definitely going to tell us that there's fecal matter present. And if there's fecal matter present, it's a good assumption to make that there's a pathogen present too. So that's what we're looking for. So some people will test for total coliforms. I don't I don't do that because it's not really telling you a lot. There's a lot of non-pathogenic stuff, and if you sample anything outside, it's going to have total coliforms almost always. So stick with generic E. coli, and that will give you the results that you need. Yep, and so then,
Amanda?
yes.
Oh, we just have one question. I can't remember. Will you talk about specifically? The question is, can you talk about the risks of using collected rainwater specifically in barrels? I don't know if you're going to talk about that or if now's a good time.
No, no, that was a good time. Yeah, so rainwater, I would treat that just like surface water. Because, right, you don't know what was sitting up on the roof, what birds pooped up there, right? So it's totally fine to use, but I would just treat it as surface water. Unless you're doing some step to it. So I know some people reclaim that water and then it goes through a filtering system and sometimes a UV system. So if you're doing that, well then, and I would still test that water. You have a better shot. But if yeah, if you're not doing anything to it, you're collecting it and using it, just use it just like you would any other surface water. Okay, good question.
And then one more
Hmm.
on the testing. Does Purdue offer, try to get back to it, can Purdue Extension offices test for well water, test well water?
No. So I will show, if I can, at the end, I'll show you I have a worksheet or a sheet that lists all the testing labs. It's on our website. So www.safeproduceindiana.com right here. And under resources, there's one that says water testing, and that's where you need to take it. And it should cost you for presence absence maybe 35 bucks, 50 in that range. Yep.
Perfect. Thanks.
All right. Great. Good questions, guys. All right. So if you test your water and you actually enumerate it, meaning you get a number, water that exceeds 126 CFU per 100 mils is considered too contaminated to use for production. And where they got this number from is for public recreational waters. So basically, they're saying if it's too dirty to swim in, it's too dirty to use on your produce. So that's where that comes from. However, a bad water test does not put you out of business, right? So if you get it above that 126, just know that it means you have to do additional risk factor, right? So maybe you were doing overhead irrigation, but now you're like, oh, okay, this is bad. I need to use drip. Or try to, when you're applying it directly to the roots, not touching the harvestable portion, right? So it doesn't mean, you're done. It just means you gotta watch this. And you can do these corrective measures, like apply a time interval for die off. So the longer that the bacteria are on the surface of a plant, the the longer that time is, the more likely they're going to die. So if you can increase the interval from when you applied the irrigation water to when you actually harvest it, the longer the better. You can re-inspect the water system, identify problems, and you can also treat the water. So we have lots of sanitizer options out there for treating production water, post-harvest water, everything. And again, if that's ever something you need, contact me and I can help you out picking a sanitizer. Well treatment. So maybe you need to treat your water. So usually a lot of chlorine products for this. Like I said, we can treat surface water. There are a couple, well, at least a couple options for that. But just remind you all to always use those labeled products and follow their label directions. We never use any of these products off label.
Few
So
more
mhm,
questions.
sure.
Yeah. LaShonda, I think we answered the one about how costly the testing is, but if you need that again or more information on that, you can put in the chat again. And then we had a question, how often should we be testing our water?
So if you're using a well, I would test it once a month, or sorry, once a year. If you have a well, if you're using surface water, you probably want to test that more frequently when you're actually using it. So I would say probably once a month. And then if it's municipal, you don't need to. Unless when I do have people testing municipal, for example, they have city water, then they put it in their hydroponic unit, and then that runs, say, for a few months. And then I do have people that will test that hydroponic water every so often, every few months or something, just to make sure that nothing got in there. Um, so that is a good practice to do. But yeah,
Okay. And then
good.
if I'm assuming for rainwater, would it be after every rain you would want to make sure that water is okay?
Well, I would say yes if you have, where you're collecting a lot of it. Um, but yeah, that's rainwater is a little bit trickier. I would say just have an idea when you're going to start using it. I would test it, and then see what your results get, because that'll tell you how you can use it, how you should be using it anyway.
Perfect.
Hmm.
Alrighty.
All
And
right.
then okay, we have a question about fish water, but I think you'll talk about aquaponics.
Yes,
So
I will. Yep, I will get
then
into
if
that.
we don't answer it, we'll get there. All right, thanks, Amanda. Go ahead.
Uh-huh. So post-harvest, so we use water for a lot of that. So washing, hydrocooling, ice. Ice we don't see too much anymore. Flumes, dump tanks, hydration. This is also the water we're drinking. And I will say, let me just point this out here. So there's nothing saying you have to wash your produce, right? And there's also nothing saying your produce has to be kept cold. But I always tell people I have a lot of, especially greens growers, they want to wash it because they feel like they should before selling it to the consumer. But I always tell them, if you can't get that stuff dry, you're just going to tank that shelf life. So you could be getting 3, 4 weeks out of unwashed lettuce. But if you wash that and you can't get it dry, you'll probably get a few days. So keep that in mind. How I tell the growers I work with, tell the buyers or whoever's buying that stuff, wash it before you eat it. That's going to be the best and get it as cool as possible, as quickly as possible. Okay, so just keep that in mind as well. So post-harvest water, zero detectable E. coli. So we don't get the wiggle room that we had on the other water. And this makes sense, right? This is water we're drinking. So zero detectable E. coli, and so for sure you just want to do presence absence for this test because you can't have any. So zero is fine. And just note too that if we talk about water infiltration into produce, so if the temperature of your water, so let me give you an example. So say I have this tomato here and it's very hot. I just picked it outside, it's a hot summer day, and I put it in icy cold water. And that's essentially what they did here. And what happens when you have this big, huge temperature difference, you create a vacuum inside this fruit. And so they do this with cantaloupe. We've done these experiments too. You do see this. And what happens is a vacuum is created and it can suck in some of that water. Well, if bacteria are out there too, it can also suck in those bacteria. So you want to just try to keep, if you're going to wash, try to keep either cool that produce down a bit before you put it in the water or heat the water up a bit. And how they demonstrated this, so here they put this blue dye up here on the stem scar. And then so this was a super hot tomato in super ice cold water. Let it sit for a few minutes, and you can see how this blue dye was sucked down inside the tomato. So just imagine if that blue dye were bacteria, right? So that's the point. So either cool down your produce a bit or heat up the water a bit, and you'll help prevent that. Um, so post-harvest water may be treated with a sanitizer. I would say almost all the big growers are running some sort of sanitizers, and that's because buyers require it. So I don't know of a buyer that would buy a cantaloupe if it hadn't been washed with the sanitizer. So lots of options out there, chlorine, peroxyacetic acid, ozone. Like I said, if you ever are in this where you think you need a sanitizer or what you want, or think you may need one, then contact me. I can help you pick out something that works the best. So what do sanitizers do? Well, they can kill the bacteria in the water, they kill the bacteria on the surface of the produce, and they can prevent cross-contamination. So, right, as you're washing produce, you're knocking off all these bacteria that are just floating around in the water. So if you do have a sanitizer, that will kill a lot of those bacteria that are just floating around. So they don't attach just another produce item that you're washing. So it is helpful. So I think if you're doing batch washing, right, where you generate a certain volume of water, wash a bunch of produce, I think using a sanitizer there makes sense. Um, but if you're just say spraying off produce, and maybe you have it on a metal mesh grate, and you're just spraying it off, that's your wash up. That's not necessary. So what sanitizers don't do, they're never going to make dirty water clean, right? They're not going to turn this into this ever. They don't kill all the bacteria effectively. They don't effectively manage biofilm. So this is the buildup of bacteria on the can be on surface of equipment, whatnot. And once you have these biofilms established, so what happens is these bacteria get together and they start excreting this substance that I always say it's kind of like they make themselves a house. And once they get this house built, it's hard, hard, hard to remove. And so basically the only way you can do it is through mechanical action, through scrubbing. So If you have a sanitizer in the mix all the time, then those bacteria can't get themselves established and make this biofilm. So that's why it's good to have it. And they never are going to sterilize a product, right? Sterilize means you remove everything. And a sanitizer does not do that. So a sanitizer will reduce the bacteria, but they don't kill 100% of everything that's there. So sanitizers are affected by temperature, turbidity, pH. Um, but really, if you're not running a sanitizer, I mean, we have to think about the infiltration with temperature, but turbidity is just how dirty your water is, and pH doesn't matter unless you have a sanitizer. So, for example, chlorine is a good example of one that it's really only effective at a pH of about 6.5 or 7. If you go on either side of that, then the efficacy or how well it kills bacteria just tanks. So if you're running chlorine, or let me go back to this picture here. And chlorine is also impacted by organic matter. So if your water looks something like this, don't bother wasting putting sanitizer in there because the organic matter is going to use up all the sanitizer and it's not going to kill any bacteria. It just won't be in the form that it can kill bacteria. So don't do it. If you're that's what your water looks like, just don't wash anything with that. All right, and so sanitizers are regulated by EPA and the label is the law. And that sanitizer, so here's an example, AgChlor 310. It tells you how to use it, to methods, rates, precautions, disposal should give you all that info. If you ever have questions on this, on the regulatory side, it's the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, or IDEM, and they're the ones that manage that. So if you have questions, they'd be the ones to reach out to, especially in disposal and things like that. All right, so let's play. Do I need a sanitizer? So first example, I'm washing radishes in the sink with running water from a faucet. The water's potable. Should I use a sanitizer? And you can put it in the chat.
Or you can put it in the Q&A. I know some people only have access to the Q&A.
Okay. What do you guys think? So I would say probably not, right? So the water's potable. We it's a one and done. We're not reusing this water, so we don't need it. So wash line sprays water on a pepper as they go by on a conveyor. The water is not used and the water is potable. What do you think? So I would say this is like the other one, right? We're not reusing it. The water's potable, so we probably don't need to use a sanitizer. But this third one, lettuce is dunked in tubs of cold water. First tub removes most of the dirt, second tub removes the rest. Water is potable at the start and reused for several batches. That's where I would use the money, spend the money to buy a sanitizer for in that case because you're reusing that water, so bacteria fall off. They can stick to other produce that you put in there. So I would definitely add a sanitizer if that's what you're doing. All right, on to our next W, waste. So right, mhm,
One question on the sanitizer. So if on that last example, when you are washing like the lettuce, would you just put the sanitizer then in the second batch wash?
yes, yep, for sure, because there are going to be a lot of organic matter in that first one, right? And so that your sanitizer, if you're using it, the killing capacity is not going to be very good. But then if you get to that second one where there's not a lot of dirt, not a lot of organic matter, then that's when you're going to get the most bang for your buck for sure.
Thanks. Oh, and then
All
one more
right. Uh-huh.
question. Sorry, more question.
Yep.
Um, oh, going back to what sanitizers, I think, yeah, you might have mentioned it, but maybe if you can pop back to that slide, which ones they can use.
This, oh, this one?
Yeah, I think that's the one that might be helpful.
Yeah. And if you
Yeah.
click on that link, I don't know if, well, go to our website. We can pull up the website. There's another handout on the website that gives all the sanitizers that have labels for fruit and vegetable wash, and that'd be the best place to start. And there's all these different chemistries, excuse me, on there. So I don't know if this one is still active actually, but it's definitely on our website. All right. So the goal is to, with waste, right? We know animals poop. We know they likely have bacteria that could be pathogenic. So we want to try to eliminate this as much as possible. So all manures can carry human pathogens, right? And some are reservoirs for certain pathogens. And all that means, a reservoir is where you naturally find that pathogen. So for example, with cattle, that's if I was looking for E. coli 157H7, that's where I'd be looking. Same if I'm looking for salmonella, I'm going to check birds, reptiles, right? So we know that some of these are reservoirs, and many things can affect how these shed these pathogens. It just depends. So on their age, the diet, the season, the environmental conditions. So how well they're shedding these pathogens can change. And so what
One
is the risk? Hmm.
one question back on the sanitizing stuff, actually. We have a no chemical pesticide fertilizer rule due to proximity to protected wetlands. How does that, or does that include sanitizers? Do you know anything
Probably,
that, yeah,
probably
that might be a question for whoever manages
idem.
that wetland item. Okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah. I I wouldn't I would ask somebody else because that's something you don't want to mess up for sure. And the same if you're doing, I've had this too, if you're doing organic, always ask your organic certifier before you use any new chemical because we were working with a guy and he had thought the sanitizer was okay for organic and turns out it wasn't. And luckily he hadn't used it yet. But he checked with his organic certifier and they said no. So you don't want to lose your organic certification over something like that. So yeah, definitely check. I don't know if it'd be someone in your county or whatnot, but I would definitely check that out. All right. So we know these pathogens may spread to the plants from waste amended soil for sure. So if you're, and I know a lot of you guys are not doing anything with manure, so I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly. But it's here. You have that information um, for you. So when you timing is important. So if you're going to use untreated manure, right? So not composted. And if you can apply it in the fall before a cover crop and before the ground freezes, great. If you're doing it in the spring to an agronomic crop, so this would be like corn or soybeans, right? That's fine. In the seasons that you're not doing fruits and vegetables. And then if you're following organic, you can apply and incorporate manure at least 90 to 120 days before harvest. So it's 90. So if you apply manure, you have to wait either 90 days if the crop touches the edible portion of the crop touches the soil. Is that right? No, other way around. Doesn't touch the soil. 120 days if it touches the harvestable portion of the crop. So you add that. So say I'm doing peppers, I'd have to wait 90 days. If I apply my manure and say I'm doing cantaloupe, I'd have to wait 120 days. And so this is by the organic standards. So just follow those. Again, you're leaving time for those bacteria to die off. That's why they're giving those recommendations. If manure is properly treated, so it's composted, it may be applied at any time. So we have a 0-day application. So I could apply properly composted manure and then I could harvest that exact same day. But that's if it's properly composted and we can document it. So is this manure or is it compost? And I get this all the time. So if you have a big old pile of poop outside the barn that you've just let sit there for the last 5 years, guess what you have? A big old pile of poop outside your barn that's been sitting there for 5 years. So that is not composted. So composting is a whole procedure where you do turnings, you record it, you hit certain temperatures, right? And so if you're not doing that, then that's not compost. This is old poop. And I hear that all the time. It's like, wow, but it's been sitting there for 5 years. Yeah, well, then it's just a 5-year-old pile of poop. So unless compost is made from manure, has been produced under legal standards, it is considered untreated manure. If what your compost is only plant origin, this doesn't apply. So we don't have those same risks that we do with manure. So you can use that. We don't have those risks. But if it's animal origin, then it needs to be composted properly and documented. And then once you finish that composting stuff, you should cover those, right? Because anytime then raw manure comes in contact with this, then the whole thing goes back to uncomposted. And you have to do the whole procedure again. Um, So if you have manure containing compost that cannot be made or adequately protected, you may need to do the compost off-site and transport to the farm, or you can also buy this stuff, right? There's people that this is what they do. And so you can buy it. They have all that documentation, and you just get that documentation from them and you're good to go. And yes, it does run downhill, right? So if you have contamination that is from up here and then you have a good rain, all that's going to come down here. So two, if just think about that where those animals are in proximity to your produce fields is very important. And then there's other animal byproducts that people use like blood meal, bone meal, fish emulsion, feather meal. Most of these they've been processed, so typically they're heated to a high temperature and pressure to kill all of those bacteria, and they'll give you that information. Um, if it contains, watch for contamination with manure. So we really don't, if it's been treated, we don't want to put it with raw manure. And a lot of these will have these OMRI, those Organic Materials Review Institute approval. And OMRI does not have anything to do with being microbiologically safe, right? It's an organic standard, but organic doesn't translate to safe. So just keep that in mind too. So biosolids, this is human waste. So we do not recommend you use human waste for crops with human consumption. People doing corn, soybeans, fine. Most buyers won't buy this. I mean, if you tell them, biosolids is just a fancy name for human poop and how it's defined. And again, if you're close to you're growing at your house and you're close to that septic system, keep that in mind too. So we try to tell people, if you can get 25 feet away. Some people do have to grow in their septic field, and we always say, well, maybe don't do radishes in there. Do something not a root crop. But so some people do, and you can. It's just beware that's a risk. And then aquaponics. So this is our two-part. We're growing hydroponically, and then we use the fish waste for the fertilizer. And I actually was just at a place on Friday up north who had a pretty good size aquaponic system. So you take the fish live in these tanks, they poop, they take the poop, filter it, and then those nutrients go to manage the plant health. Interestingly enough, this guy was using so much I mean, he was doing water testing a lot for all the different nutrients and minerals, and he was supplementing quite a bit. So I don't know what that says. There was a lot of fish in there, so I don't know. I worked with a lot of aquaponics folks. I've seen a lot of good systems, and I've seen some pretty, um, from a food safety perspective, sort of sketchy ones. So we have people here at Purdue that does works on this, so we can get you hooked up if you have questions. So was there another question about aquaponics?
Oh yeah. Let me find it. In the meantime, there was actually one going back to the biosolids. So speaking specifically of chicken waste, how far should produce be away from chicken waste?
Yeah, as far as far as you can. So, I mean, certainly a risk for salmonella. And if you're not doing anything with that chicken waste, to make sure that if the chickens are there, people, if they're working with the chickens and they either change their shoes or clean their shoes or have some sort of method to deal with that.
And then, I'm sorry, I cannot find the question about hydroponics. Don't know where it went.
Okay, well, just stop me if you find it.
Okay, sounds good.
So really, when you design these aquaponic systems, you want to have a system designed to minimize splash. So we don't want that water touching the edible plant parts. And really, this water should be tested frequently for the presence of human pathogens. So, in a generic, say generic E. coli. So we did some work on aquaponics a few years ago where they actually had a hydroponic and an aquaponic unit in the same greenhouse bay. And the student was looking at, so he had his fish one, and then he had the hydroponic, and his fish ones, the water tested positive for E. coli, and it actually was a Shiga toxin producing E. coli, which he didn't add, so the fish had it. And then, but in the aquaponic that had the positive E. coli, 0157H7, he tested the above portion of the plant where he harvested and there was never any E. coli. So that shows even if that water is contaminated, as long as you're careful on the harvesting and you're not splashing stuff around. I know it's almost impossible not to splash water around in the hydroponic or aquaponic systems, but trying to avoid that as much as possible helps. So he was able to show that even if you have contaminated water in an aquaponic system, you can still grow safe produce in it. So just keep that in mind.
Found
All
the
right.
question.
Okay. Yes.
How often should you test water if you're using fish water aquaponics?
I mean that it's down to I down to the operation. So there's not a requirement. It's not that you have to you test it on a certain frequency. Um, I know a lot of the hydroponic guys I work with, I would say they probably do it every 3 months, so quarterly at least. Some I know some do it once a month, but I'd say a lot of them it's like a quarterly test, or some of them, they'll grow a big batch, harvest that, and then when they get that out right before they're going to harvest, they'll test the water. But there's not a requirement, but something some sort of frequency, and it might, whatever that looks like to your operation. But definitely, I would say probably the most common I see is every 3 months.
Great, thanks. And then
Hmm.
one other question. I believe they're meaning, can you use worm castings in water as like a fertilizer, or is that typically just used in soil?
Oh, I wouldn't see why not. But so
Okay.
just see how that worm casting is being produced, right? So I know we've seen some that's commercially produced that they do treat it somehow. That hasn't been either heated to high temperature. If it hasn't had anything done to it, then it's raw manure. I mean, that's of animal origin, right? Even if it's worm casting. So just keep that in mind when if you're putting it in the water.
Great, thanks.
Hmm?
And then Amber has a question. She raised her hand. Amber, I believe you'll be able to go off mute if you want to do that and ask your question, or you can put it in the chat. Maybe it was an accidental hand raise. That's okay too. All right. Well, if
Oh,
you have a question, feel free to go off mute,
yep.
Amber.
I'll just keep going until you let me
Sounds
know.
good.
All right. So wildlife. So this is animals, including pets and livestock, that's near where you're producing. So like I said, if you're indoor, this probably isn't going to be an issue for you. But it could be, right? You never know when that mouse could get in there, a bird could fly in. Um, Pets fall into the same risk, right? I always joke, do I really want to eat with the dog just rolled in? Probably not, right? But so they can move pathogens around. And also not, yes, they're a source of pathogens in their poop, but they also walk through this stuff, right? So as they're walking around in the fields, they're moving this stuff all over the place, right? So just keep that in mind too. So it's not just their feces, it's their feet moving this stuff around. So just monitor those population, apply interventions should you need to. And here, so during the growing season, this is for monitoring. During your growing, so we don't have anything harvestable yet at this point, we're going to monitor for feces and evidence of intrusion, evaluate the risk of fecal contamination, and consider past observations and maybe what's attracting the wildlife to the area. So this is just when we're going, but now this is the most important. So immediately prior to harvest, so then if you see fecal contamination, signs of animal activity, you have to assess that risk and decide if maybe that crop can even be harvested or maybe a portion of that crop, right? Because if you're seeing all this animal intrusion, then that's bad news, right? That means the animals were in there and they likely had, there's some contamination somewhere. And I don't know if I might have it on one of those other slides, but typically what we say, if you see, say you see a pile of poop, we always say a hula hoop size. That's going to be your no harvest zone around that. So that might have to be smaller depending on the size of your farm, but that's a good rule of thumb. So you see the pile of poop, you think a hula hoop size around that, I'm not harvesting, and then you harvest around that. So deterring wildlife, you can use decoys, fencing. So these double fences here, so the deer can jump over that first one, but they can't get over the second one. And these are usually electrified too. Oh, and these decoys, we had a grower one year in one of our trainings that said that he bought one of these coyote decoys and put it out. And he said when he went to go get it in the fall, it had 13 bullet holes in it. So it was fooling somebody. Oh, here's some other decoys, these high fences, and you can use netting. We see a lot of our berry growers using netting. But again, um, any of these things could be used. These little visual deterrents. I always think of these like used car salesman type things. We see a lot of old CDs hanging in packing houses. Um, but any of these can be used to detour wildlife. So I kept that
We
short and
have
sweet. Mm-hmm.
perfect. We have one question. Sherry, I let you unmute yourself if you want to expound, but it's does Purdue have info to treat outside fish ponds? I'm assuming they mean like then to use that water on crops, but Sherry, if you want to expound, you can.
So well, I'll just mention if you do want so a pond that you're going to if you're going to irrigate out of a pond, yes, there are products you can use to add a sanitizer should you want to, or you just think of how you're using that water. So maybe if you can use drip irrigation or something like that, that might be more useful.
Great, thanks.
Is
And
there
then
another
Amber,
question? Yes,
go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, Amber.
For some reason, it wasn't allowing me to like type in the chat, but I just wanted to mention I work with GAP certification in Virginia, so hello to all of you in Indiana. But one thing about the for the water testing for the aquaponics, this the requirement, at least if you get GAP certification, and that's the harmonized GAP, you have to water test once a month.
Mhm.
And so I would suggest that for folks, if they're going to be using aquaponics setup in a school, that's really important to think about, just because you are dealing with a more vulnerable population. So,
Mhm. Yep, good point.
Thanks. Alrighty, I think we're good. Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
All right, workers, like I said, workers is anybody. They can be even volunteers. That's considered a worker and you need to train them. Right? So poor health and hygiene can result in the introduction of foodborne pathogens into produce. And so if you are the supervisor, you need to recognize what those symptoms look like and know that they should not be touching the produce. They can do other jobs, but they shouldn't be touching the produce. So workers are a problem because they carry these human pathogens. They can spread these pathogens, especially if they're not washing their hands. And they do require training. So it's if you're the supervisor, that's your job to make sure that these workers are trained and they know what to do. So things like proper hand washing and how to handle illnesses and injuries are very important. So what's poor hygiene? It could be improper hand washing practices, dirty restrooms, the whole footwear thing can be an issue, especially if we have a lot of diversified farms. So you don't want to go into the chicken coop and then right out into your patch of lettuce and harvest, right? Without washing your hands, possibly changing clothes, possibly changing footwear. So
We
hand
have
washing,
one.
uh-huh,
We have one
sure.
question back to the animals. So specifically for mice and groundhogs, do you have any thoughts on specific decoys for those pests?
I would use them myself if I did. So these, uh, let me see, where is it? These things don't work, in my opinion. So they make that little noise that's supposed to get like any of those like groundhogs, things like that. And relocation, we were told we had a wildlife guy come and talk to us once, and he said if you want to relocate a raccoon, you have to take it at least 10 miles from where you caught it, or otherwise it finds its way back. I found that amazing. So no, I don't have a good recommendation, unfortunately. I would say try to find a good pest guy. That's at least that's what I do at my house. Oops, sorry.
And then someone else said in rabbits, and I'm
Yeah.
assuming might be the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very challenging. Yeah.
Yep. Very, very challenging. And it's funny too, like we were doing some trainings in Gary, and there's actually a lot of urban growers in Gary, but because there was so many of the house, people sort of left in some of these areas, the amount of wildlife they have is crazy. And even like there's like wild goats and sheep and stuff that you see. I mean, so it's not just even, it's not just can be a urban problem too. It's not just rural, so keep that in mind. So hand sanitizer cannot replace proper hand washing. I've had growers argue this with me, and it's not true. You cannot, sanitizer does not replace hand washing. So if sanitizer is all you have access to, okay, but that is not a replacement. So just like when we talked about the sanitizer and the organic matter, right? When I said that dirty water would just use up all the killing capacity of the sanitizer, having dirty hands is the same deal. So it says 99.9% reduction. That's with clean hands. So if you have dirty hands, the killing capacity is getting used up. So it's not going to get 99.9. I'll guarantee that. So when must hands be washed? After the toilet. Basically, when anytime you do something different. So toilet, before starting or returning to work, eating or smoking, putting on gloves, touching animals or animal waste, or any other time your hands may be contaminated. Throw that in there too. So pretty much anytime you change activities. And I will say gloves is not a requirement. You may have a glove policy, and that's great. But just make sure that when you have those gloves on, you can't be touching your hair. I see that all the time. It's like they'll put on gloves and then it's like a false sense of security. And then you see them touching their face and their hair, and the other surfaces. And it's like, well, then if you do that, you need to change your gloves, right? So those gloves, yes, they're protecting you from all those other surfaces, but they're not protecting the produce if they're not clean. So steps to cleaning and sanitizing pretty much anything. We're going to pre-rinse, remove all the field soil, plant debris, you name it. Then we're going to wash it with detergent. Then we're going to rinse that, and then we come in with our sanitizer. So this is just going to kill any of those residual bacteria that are hanging around. Restroom should be provided. I mean, per OSHA, growers should have at least one restroom for every 20 employees, located no more than a quarter-mile walk from the work site or a 10-minute drive, and they need to be cleaned regularly on some sort of schedule and documented. So you may have a sanitation company that does that for you. You may have janitors, whatnot, but that should be documented. And then proper use of toilets. So everything needs to go in the toilet. I know some cultures, it's not common to put toilet paper in the toilet. They'll put it in a waste paper basket next to it, but we don't want that. We want everything in the toilet. And always wash your hands after using the toilet. And whatever your PPE, personal protective equipment you're using, so say gloves, maybe a hairnet, maybe an apron, all that should come off before you go into the toilet. So you don't want to take any of that stuff in with you. And you'll be surprised how many times I see that. So worker clothing, so you want to have clean clothes every day, clean footwear. Maybe you need designated footwear. So gloves, like I said, they're not required, but if you use them, make sure they're clean. They're not torn. Yep, and I just said that. So apron, gloves, anything that needs to come off before you go into the restroom. So sick workers should not handle produce. So they can do other things. I mean, you could have them file some paperwork but they're not touching the produce. And so we need to monitor people if they're experiencing any of these symptoms. So diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, fever, muscle headaches, muscle aches, headaches. So anything like that, you see somebody, somebody needs to be told that they should not be touching the produce, or you need to tell them if you're the person in charge. And people say, well, why would anyone go to work sick? Well, maybe they don't have sick pay. Maybe they don't have sick leave, no health insurance. I would say most of the time with the people we work with, it's you just need to get the work done, right? You have this limited time to do it, and it doesn't matter that I'm sick. I have to keep on plugging away. Well, you can do something else. Just don't touch the produce.
And I was just
And
gonna,
work. Mhm.
oh, just a quick comment. I have seen where maybe there's like a set amount of kid or set group of kids that have, they're the ones working on the garden, and so they have like a special section for like their boots or some, certain clothing that they might not have with them at school. They kind of just have in a separate um, section of the garden or, a shed or something like that. So just wanted to mention that can be a good idea because sometimes it gets dirty too, and then they might have to go back to class, and that can be challenging. And then we also have a question, what's the best cleaning detergent for fresh produce? I think that gets back to the sanitizer um, question
Yep.
if I'm not missing something. So yeah,
Yep.
if you
So
can.
I can show you if we have time at the end, or you can go to our website. I can show you the list of sanitizers. So they just have to have a label for that use. So, and the ones that are on that list, it says for fruit and vegetable washing. Yep.
Perfect.
Cool
Okay.
question. What are we doing on time? Okay, we're getting there. So worker injuries, so we should make sure we have first aid kits that are stocked. We want to clean and bandage all wounds, and if the wound's on the hand, we have to have a glove over that. So if we're harvesting, discard any produce that may be contaminated with blood, any bodily fluids. Clean and sanitize if it's a food contact surface, and we're cleaning and sanitizing that before we resume operations and reporting all injuries. And then workers should be trained. Like this training is a good example. Cornell and the Produce Safety Alliance, they put out, it's about, I think it's a little over 15 minutes. They just updated it here not very long ago. Um, Food Safety Begins on the Farm is the name of it. And you could sit your workers down. They watch this 15-minute video. It covers all the good basic gaps, and they can sign a document saying they've been trained. So, and that could also include, you could then give them a bullet point of any specific things that's specific to your operation. So you want to cover the basics and then what they need to know to do their job. So worker training should include, right, general information, basic health topics such as being sick, or procedure for reporting illness, basic sanitation, how to wash your hands, your restroom procedures, management of injuries, any farm specific procedures. So the location of facilities, disciplinary actions, things like that. So once a year, you should make sure all your workers are trained. And that's because we do this for growers basically this training, they'll get them together. We do that training for them. So putting it all together. So water, wastes, wildlife, and workers, I think just keeping that in mind. So the four W's, if you can focus on these things and the items that we talked about today, you're going to be in a pretty good spot of doing things right. And like I said, you're managing a risk. That's that's really all you can do because we can't eliminate bacteria at the farm. It's just not possible. So we can do things to manage those risks, but that's all we can do. And we need to do our due diligence. Um, yeah, so again, produce safety is all about identifying and dealing with those risks. And like I said before, like sometimes, and we know what the best practice is, but sometimes it's just not possible on a given operation. And that's okay, but we know that we need to manage that risk, right? So I think that's all I have today. I wanted to make sure we left you guys plenty of time to answer any questions. So it looks like we have about 15 minutes or so. If there's anything, I'm happy to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you. We have one question about hydroponic towers, specifically in public spaces. Can you talk more about what you would recommend around having hydroponic towers in general and specifically in public spaces of a school?
Oh, and this, so is the produce, so was what being grown in there for consumption? Is that is that the question?
I can try to unmute you, Melinda. I think we have that for both. Guess I can speak to my knowledge while I'm trying to unmute her. We have some schools that are specifically growing for consumption, and then some like that would transport to the cafeteria. And we've also gotten that question of like if it's in a classroom, is that of concern, where students are around all the time? But then sometimes it's just for a taste test. So maybe if you can answer both, and then Melinda, if you want to expound, you can.
Yeah, so in my opinion, if it's going into the what people are going to be eating, I would limit the people that are around them. Now, if it's in a classroom, that's still okay, right? Because you can educate the students who come into that classroom that, hey, we don't touch this. You know, you're still monitoring it. It's still in a room that is locked, but if it's something where anybody can have access to that, I probably wouldn't. I would grow something that's not going to be consumed in there. I mean, so you could do flowers or, you know, whatever, but I wouldn't consume it because you just have no idea who's touched it, who's, been in it. That would be my recommendation. But I think as long as, even if it's in your classroom, then that's fine. I mean, because you can train the students, the workers, however, to that they know not to touch that or whatnot. So I don't, if that answers it.
Yeah, and then also, I'm not sure if you mentioned, but cafeterias, I feel like you could do the same, maybe, put up a sign, say
Yeah,
this is for harvesting and we don't want people touching it, and maybe, put it in a spot where the cashier could see it or something like that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's still doable. But if you have really no control over it, I wouldn't be putting any of that into for consumption.
Great. Any other questions people have? And again, I can let you off mute. Someone said they're putting up a growing station in the cafeteria and planning to put plexiglass around it.
Yeah,
That's
perfect.
a great idea. Yeah. You have
I bet
access
we
to
have a
that. That's
lot of
awesome.
plexiglass laying around from after COVID. I'm sure Purdue does.
Yeah, so true. And Melinda said our district admin wanted to put it in the front office for everyone who comes into the school to be able to see it. Um, yeah, Melinda, I wonder, I feel like you guys might have two, and so I wonder, could it be something where like one of them's up there, but then you're not using that as much for consumption? Um, or you could do education too there. I mean, there's always someone at the
Yeah,
front office, so they could say like, it's really not for touching, just for looking. So,
yeah. And I think with the right signage, you could make it work. I think as long as you think about where it's placed, but I've been to places like at malls where I've seen hydroponic things up or like maker spaces. and there's like nobody there. Anybody could come in, touch that stuff, we could do whatever. That would be where I would be. No, but I think if it's a space that you can control and with the right signage and somebody's there to, make sure, then yeah, I think you can make it work.
Yeah. Yeah, someone said maybe use the one where it's more in a public space to grow things that you're going to cook, which I think could be helpful.
Yep, for
I
sure.
wonder, I'm kind of speaking out loud or thinking out loud, but if I think we do have a lot of people that are growing lettuce or, ready to eat foods in hydroponic setting and then taking it to their cafeteria. And if they are harvesting that and then washing it with um, like city water, is that something where that would probably be good, or would you still encourage some sort of sanitizer for that? Or do you
No,
think that would
I
be
think,
fine? Okay.
yep, that would be fine. And I would recommend too is don't wash any of that stuff until right before you're going to use it because that will just help increase your shelf life. So keep it cold and get it cool as possible, as quickly as possible, but then wash right before you're going to eat it. Because if you can't get that stuff dry, it all the spoilage bacteria increase, and then you have some slimy mess in a few days.
Yeah. I was also thinking it's interesting. Definitely some people on this call are both the grower and the buyer, as they might be, or the school as a whole is both the grower and the buyer. And
Yep.
so I think thinking of ways that you can, not like Amanda said, not washing any of your produce until, you're storing it in the cafeteria, and then that's kind of your processing center is that cafeteria. And so even thinking of sanitizer and things like that, like, that's just helpful to think about because you have
Yep.
sanitized or municipal water there. So it's a
Hmm.
good thing to think
Yep,
about.
for sure.
And yes, we'll be sending out the recording and the slides so you guys all have that. And Amanda, can you just speak to, I know you've been so helpful when we've had specific questions, but just speak to how you can kind of be a continued resource for schools.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so just reach out to me. My email address is there. You can give me a call. We actually can do these trainings for your school. We're actually going to be doing one up in Elkhart for students. So we're spacing it out, so we're doing the time that they have. So we're happy to do that. We've done a lot. I've done a lot with like Ivy Tech, a lot of places that have farms or smaller farms. So yeah, if there's any training that you need, we can do it over, online. We can do it in person. And if there's any resources you need, maybe I'll stop sharing. Maybe I'll show our website. We got a few
Yeah,
minutes, right?
that's a good idea. Yeah. I was
Oops.
thinking too, if anyone would want to do, a very small training for maybe K through 6 or something like that, I think that's something we could also work on. I don't know if Amanda has that, that would be specifically geared towards them, but it could be good, just do like a very simplified version of all of this, but give them the opportunity to kind of learn some of these things.
For sure. All right, let me try to get back here. Share my screen. All right, so here's our website. It's just www.safeproducein.com. And if you go into this resources down here, so here's it kind of it's split into the different things. But when we talk about water, um, there should be a sanitizer list. Oh, here's this water testing. This So here's if you need to know this resource here. These are all labs that can do the water tests for you. So in here we have their contact information. So if you need to do water testing, in Indiana, that's there for you. And it's split up both if you want a presence absence or you want a quantitative. So we have that all there for you. Let me see. Let's see. Oh, here. This is a produce sanitizer approved for use in Indiana. And so here's all the products. These are the product names, they're whatever the chemistry is. So all these have labels for fruit and vegetable washing. So if you click on, this is a good place to start. Um, so, but again, just contact me too. I'm happy to help you um, get those. And then here, under tools and videos, I think it's this one. Yes. So here's that. These are those videos I was talking about. So you can just click on these and they play, like I say, they're like 15, 20 minutes, something like that, for training your workers. And then we also do have some of these gap posters you can print and put up. And it just kind of, if you, this wouldn't apply to you, but you work or illness, I think the more signage you have and how to wash your hands, signs, things like that is always good. But yeah, so and then contact us. You can do it directly or you can put it in here and this will come to us too. But our other contact, so it's about me, so it's me and then Scott Monroe, he's an educator located down in Vincennes, and then Terry Gary is our senior extension administrator and she is located here in West Lafayette's campus as well. So between the three of us, we hit up all the food safety needs in the state of Indiana for fruit and vegetable growers. So I'll leave this here if anybody has any questions, but I can stop sharing too.
Alrighty. Well, if there are no other questions, we can end a few minutes early and give everyone some time back. But yeah, thank you so much, Amanda. This is awesome. I'm glad that you were able to share so much information and also just kind of be acquainted with all of these folks as
Yeah,
you and your team are such a resource to the state and the different regions. And so, yeah, just excited that people can reach out to you and you guys have
absolutely.
offered to do site visits in the past. And yes, it's all very, very helpful. We appreciate it.
Yep.
Let me
Yeah,
just
we're
make
also
sure.
we're always happy too to come out if you just have a question, you want us to take a look around, or if you're thinking about setting something up, you want us to look over your plans.
Yeah,
We're happy to do any of that. So we try to be a one-stop shop. So reach out for sure.
great. Alrighty. Looks like we're good on the questions. Thanks so much for joining
Great.
everyone and
Thanks,
let us
everyone.
know. Alrighty, see you later.